Hi, I'm John Kursky, and in part 4 of making you an AI-enabled Power BI tester, I'm going to show you how to set up skills and custom agents in GitHub Copilot, which will let you create tests quicker. All right, so before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all the new features and training we'll be putting out in the coming weeks. And with that, in the last set of 3 parts that we have in this series, we laid the foundation for creating tests, we laid the foundation for naming tests, and how to automate the running of those tests using Power Automate. Wasn't a lot of AI in there. But you needed that foundation so that when we introduce AI, you have a better understanding of what it is doing underneath the hood so that you can course correct if you need to. So I want to show you today GitHub Copilot's features called skills and custom agents that's going to let you build your tests quicker and update your tests and run your tests. Now, before I show you on the screen, I want to kind of explain what those 2 terms mean, at least how I understand them. A skill is a set of text that is stored in your Visual Studio workspace or your specific project that agents can use to understand how to execute and run tasks. So, for instance, let's say that you want to make sure that the agent understands how it needs to generate a DAX query or understand what functions are available to generate tests. Well, you could build a markdown file that identifies how an agent should understand how to execute that. So it's kind of like a guideline, very specific to the work that you're doing. A custom agent, on the other hand, is more of like a persona, a specific kind of scenario in which you need it to execute. So in our case, we're going to see how do we set up a PQL tester? How do we provide a set of instructions so that when somebody says, let's create a test, that we can step by step go through the process and in a more repeatable fashion. It's more like having another person around who's very skilled at a very specific set of steps that you can rely on or refer to within GitHub Copilot. Not a true person, a Copilot. All right, so up on my screen here, I have the sample Power BI desktop file that we've come to use in a lot of these videos. Now, in order to leverage GitHub Copilot and the skills and the custom agents, there's some things that you want to make sure that you have installed, and I'm going to go through these real quick. If you haven't watched the Power BI Developer series or the AI-enabled Power BI Developer series, I'll have that linked at the end of this video, and this will give you more in-depth on how to set up PBIP and how to set up some of the other features in Visual Studio Code that I am going to go through now. In this version of the sample model, I have already loaded the functions. So if I go into my Timdal on the right-hand side here, you'll see that the functions for PQL.Assert have already been loaded and there's nothing else in there. I also made sure that I have saved this as a Power BI project file. Now, the reason we want to do that is the GitHub Copilot is going to interact with the underlying files that are saved in plain text in order to add the tests and update the tests and execute the tests. So I've got that saved already in PBIP. I have the PQL.Assert libraries open. Now, I also already have Visual Studio Code installed. I also have made sure that I have these extensions, which I go into depth in the other series, installed. So I have a GitHub Copilot chat. I have the Power BI modeling MCP server because we're going to rely on that in order to interact with the open model. And then I also have the Timdal extension added just because it makes it easier to look and read from an IntelliSense perspective any of the changes in the Timdal code. All right, so if I go to the top left here in Explorer, I want to add a skill. And there's two skills that I'm going to show you I want to add. I want to add a DAX query guidelines in order to provide some general instructions on how to build DAX queries. And I have referenced Rui Romano's site where I'm taking the skill from in the document. If you want to recreate these files, I have them out, or reuse these files. I have them out on the PQL.Assert website. Under examples, you're going to go to custom agents. And within that, we're going to have the skills in the agents, and I'm going to show you how to copy and paste the markdown files. So the first one I want to do is the DAX query guideline. And notice that I do have it based on Rui Romano's work, and it's licensed at MIT. This goes through DAX query best practices, syntax rules. And as a custom agent or an agent notices that this skill is registered, if you have any sort of mention of DAX and that, it will read this file to give it more context on how it should execute when it's building DAX. So how do I add this as a skill in GitHub Copilot? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I got this in raw format. And then I am going to go back to Visual Studio Code. And one thing I will point out is I am using version control, because now that I'm going to let AI make updates as I'm setting up these skills and custom agents, I want to make sure I have this backed up in source control just in case. Now, I'm going to hit the Control-Shift-P and pick the option for new skill file. Control-Shift-P, new skill file. And I am going to add it to my GitHub skills folder, which will put it in my local project. And I'm going to call it DAX Query Guidelines. Oh, it didn't want to take that. So let me try that one more time. Click here. DAX Query Guidelines. All right, there we go. Now, it will have created a GitHub folder, skills, DAX query guidelines. Now, the skills file follows a markdown format that I will provide a link to in the description if you're curious as to what this format is. But it's, in the sense, markdown with name descriptions. A lot of the metadata is within that first part, and then the rest of your prompts or context is provided below those three dashes. So I'm going to overwrite that with what I have here. Thank you, Rui. And save it. Now, the next one I want to add is a PQL.Assert guideline, so that when it's building the test, it understands what functions are available and how to build the functions. So I am going to create one more skill. Let's do Control-Shift-P. Add new skill file. PQL.Assert. And I am going to go back to the PQL.Assert, go to raw, and copy this. And you'll notice that it's got all the PQL.Assert unit testing and instructions on how to use it. So I'm going to save that as well. Now, if you want to see, is that actually registered in your GitHub Copilot chat, you can toggle your chat here. And if I hit /skills and hit enter, you can actually see which skills are registered. So I see those have been successfully registered. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I want to build the custom agent. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P, hit new custom agent, call it PQL tester. Oh, I did that again where I need to pick GitHub agents, PQL tester. And now I'm going to go back to the repository, and this is a set of instructions on how the custom agent should behave. Paste this. Now you will notice if I scroll all the way to the top, there's some specific metadata here. It is indicating that I should have or should be able to use the Power BI modeling MCP as well as read and edit in agent mode. It's important to kind of point out here is those are the tools. That's why you want to have those as the extension. I also will point out is a lot of what this agent is doing is identifying the steps that need to be taken, what it shouldn't do, and what it should do. A lot of work can go into building agents, and feel free to review this part of the code and kind of get a better understanding of how a custom agent should behave. All right, so I hit save. All right, so I've got those registered. Now, if I know that this has been registered correctly, if I go down to the bottom here and I have it in agent mode and I click this chevron, I should see PQL tester as an option. At this point, I can hit PQL tester. And first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to ask it connect to sample model. At this point, the custom agent, since it knows that it should be using the Power BI modeling MCP server, it is going to try to connect to it. Now, if this is your first time using it, you're going to get a lot of prompts to connect, because for security purposes, this is making connections or doing something on your computer. It's going to ask you for permission to do so. I'm going to say allow in this workspace. It's going to find the local port. Looks like it did. And now I'm just going to simply write create tests. Now the agent at this point is going to ask some questions. Where do you want to create it? Dev, test, prod, or any? Let's just do dev for right now. Now at this point, it is going to try to understand what's in the model currently. And it's going to make calls out to the model, which is open. For those who don't know, when you have a Power BI model open, it's actually running a small SSAS version, so it's connecting to a localhost port to interact with the model to understand the columns, the tables, and the measures. So when you see stuff like table operation, function operations, this is the agent reaching out to that model to get a better understanding of the structure. All right, now it looks like it has created the schema.dev, data quality.dev, and calculations.dev. Now, if I go back to the model here real quick, you'll maybe it hasn't shown up just yet here, but I am going to hit respond and yes. So it wants to make the changes. There we go. And what it's going to do is try to create the functions in the existing model, and then also notate those in the functions.timdal file, and then finally make sure they're also kind of written out in DAX.query. So that way, if you open up the Power BI model again, you will see the functions defined in the semantic model, but also available for you in the DAX query view, so you can make updates if you want to do this outside of using the Copilot chat. All right, and since I have version control turned on, we should be able to see some of the changes that are going to happen in the model, and I'll show you as it works through. From time to time, I may fast forward a little bit, so that way you're not waiting on the chat to finish. But as you can imagine, you could probably run this in the background and have it building it while you're working on another item in your project. All right, so fast forward a little bit. We have now finished creating the tests and actually executed those for me, because it can run and execute it against the model. If I look at the files that were changed, you can see that in the DAX query view, it ended up creating these tests, as well as updating the functions.timdal so that those are identified. And then that's also the DAX queries JSON is just identifying the new files that show up in their tab order. Now, let's say I'm looking at the calculations here, and I want to create a test that for number of characters always shows 0 and not blank when filtered by a date and the number, and there are no records. Let's see what it does here. All right, so now you can see it actually created the test here, added in the filter, and you could update that how you see fit, but I'll take that, the right filter there. And I can also ask it, rerun data quality tests. So without having to actually open up the Power BI model and click through the DAX query views or run it through Power Automate, I can actually have it run through those tests as well. Now, it's important to point out here that as these things are saved, you are going to want to commit that to source control, and make sure if you switch back to Power BI and you close it, don't hit save. Now, the reason you don't want to do that is right now, as of March 2026, there isn't the kind of what we would consider hot loading, where in other programming languages or applications, you would see the new tabs show up. So notice that I don't see the tabs show up here, but they are present on the left-hand side. You have to close Power BI Desktop, open it back up in order to see those. So just keep that in mind. It's also, if you commit to source control that way and you accidentally save it after you committed, at least you can revert it back and those files will be there. It's also is a good time to point out is because you committed to source control, now you have a version of what the AI has updated. And this is really important to understand the importance of version control, because the AI or general artificial or Gen AI is a co-pilot in our sense. You are the pilot, so you need to make sure that you have the tools and the guidance necessary so that you can revert back or course correct if something happens. All right, so with that, I hope you learned something today. We went over how to set up skills in GitHub Copilot and set up a custom agent in order to facilitate testing using AI, and all because we can use PBIP, GitHub Copilot, Power BI Modeling MCP, and just with a little bit of additional skills and custom agents, we can kind of switch personas and build tests and have it update. So you can imagine a scenario in which, let's say you find an error in a DAX calculation in production. You can build a test for it and add it to your test just by working with GitHub Copilot and using PQL-Tester as a custom agent. Very, very powerful stuff we can do, and I feel like we're only scratching at the surface of these things as the technology is getting better. Now, in the next part of this series, I'm going to introduce you to a way that maybe gets the setup off the ground a little quicker. But until then, appreciate your time and take care.